In this portion of scripture, he's dealing with the servitude of Hebrew men and women. That is where one Hebrew would buy another man or another woman to come and work as his servant in his household. And that was the economy and the dynamics of that time. I know that slavery, I guess, or servanthood has that kind of stigma in our days, as we have seen it used or abused by many people. And I'm thankful for the liberty and the freedoms that have come to make men and women have their dignity again and their freedoms and their liberties as God had given them to us in the first place. I want you to understand that this portion of scripture relates to a time period in which this was the economy, this was the way they looked after each other. If someone was in great need, they were poor and they were financial distress, they would submit and give up their freedoms and liberties to serve in a household where someone could help them and pay out the debt that they had. And so God gave some instructions as to how they ought to treat one another, how they would treat these servants in their households. And we see here the great mercy of God upon humanity and upon his people, because in his instruction he clearly showed the children of Israel that they were not to treat their brethren who have come into this position with rigor or with force, like how the heathens treated their slaves. And the Lord always reminds us that every human being belongs to him, and we need to respect God's creation and really love people the way God loved them. Now, in that biblical time, a Hebrew man or woman may find themselves in this servitude period because of various reasons. If someone became extremely poor, they could sell their freedom. And you can look at that up and write this text down, Leviticus 25, verse 39. Or a father might sell his child. An example is found in Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 5, where they had mortgaged their lands and their properties, and they could not continue to make payment. And so they sold their children in order to pay some debt. Or a debtor who couldn't pay his debts could become the slave of a creditor. An example of this is in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1. Remember that prophet's wife that came to Elijah and told him about the creditors that were coming and that she needed help. Unless she pays, they're going to come and take her children from her. Or if a thief didn't have enough to pay a fine levied on him, he was to be sold to pay the fine. And that is found also in Exodus chapter 22, verse 3. A fifth reason is a Hebrew might become a slave when captured in war. And we certainly see that happening, you know, when they went to battle between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, or even when the Philistines would come and take them. And the last judgment is the Assyrian army took the northern kingdom, Israel, into captivity, and the southern kingdom was taken by Nebuchadnezzar and many years later. And so they found themselves to be as slaves there. And lastly, a Hebrew who was ransomed from a Gentile might then be sold by the one who ransomed him to another Hebrew. And that's found in Leviticus 25, verses 47 to 55. In that scenario, if a Hebrew man had a debt to a Gentile and could not pay, so that Gentile took him into servitude or took him as a servant, as a slave, then another Hebrew man can redeem him and buy him from that Gentile. And when he's bought him, he can either keep him or he could also sell him to another Hebrew man. So these are the scenarios in which a Hebrew person might find themselves in bondage or in servitude, as the Bible shows us in these passages.